The Galactic Council convened in the Great Hall of Cyrannon Prime, the capital world of the Cyranni, the founding species of the Council. Representatives from 17 species sat in their designated alcoves high above the main floor, their attention fixed on the central holographic display that dominated the chamber. One region of the galaxy pulsed with an alarming number of markers, each one representing a human settlement, a human colony, a human claim on territory that the Council considered its domain. The humans had spread across 12 star systems in less than 200 years. That was an expansion without precedent in the Council's 10,000-year history. No species had ever grown so quickly. No species had ever shown such relentless drive to push outward, to claim new worlds, to build new homes among the stars. Councillor Zoran of the Cyranni rose to address the assembly. He was ancient by human standards, over 400 years old, his face lined with the wisdom of centuries of service. He stated that the human species has demonstrated an aggressive pattern of expansion that threatens the stability of the entire sector. They do not ask permission. They do not negotiate boundaries. They simply arrive and they build and they claim. If left unchecked, they will overrun every system within their reach. The hall murmured with agreement. The holographic display shifted to show the 12 human colonies, each one marked with a red indicator. 3 of them pulsed with an additional warning symbol, indicating they were located in systems that the Council had designated as protected space. Commander Vex of the Vorth stood next. The Vorth were a warrior species who had themselves been brought into the Council after centuries of conflict that had nearly destroyed them. They understood aggression because they had once embodied it. Vex was tall and broad, with dark scales covering his face and hands. He said that the humans remind me of us, before we learned discipline, before we learned restraint. But at least we had the wisdom to stop before we overran our neighbors and made enemies of every species in the galaxy. These humans show no such wisdom. They have no off switch. They will keep going until something stops them. The Xylos representative spoke next. The Xylos were a species of translucent beings who communicated through neural translator modules. Their representative, a being who called itself Sentinel, said that human psychological profiles have been studied extensively. Their minds are wired for exploration and domination in equal measure. This drive cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be negotiated away. It can only be contained, controlled, or eliminated. The Galvani representative, a stout figure draped in ornate fabrics, spoke up. The Galvani were traitors above all else. Their representative said that we should consider the economic implications. The humans have opened trade routes that were previously inaccessible. They have established markets on 13 worlds. A quarantine would disrupt these flows of commerce. Perhaps there is a middle ground, a negotiated settlement that satisfies both parties. Commander Vex turned on the Galvani representative with barely concealed contempt. He said there is no middle ground with a species that respects no boundaries. The Vorth learned this lesson the hard way. You cannot compromise with an expanding fire. You must starve it of fuel or it will consume everything. Ambassador Eleanor Vance stood to address the Council. She was 70 years old, with silver hair pulled back from her face and lines of experience etched into her features. She had represented humanity to the Galactic Council for 15 years, building relationships, negotiating agreements, trying to bridge the gap between her species and the galaxy at large. She spoke with a calm dignity that commanded attention despite the hostility in the room. She said that humanity has always explored. It is the core of who we are, written into our DNA. Every child on Earth grows up hearing stories of explorers who crossed oceans, climbed mountains, walked on the moon, and reached for the stars. We cannot stop being who we are. But we have also extended hands of friendship to every species we have encountered. We have traded knowledge freely. We have shared our technology. We have offered assistance to colonies in need. We have not come as conquerors. Councillor Zoran replied that your cooperation with some species is noted and appreciated. But so is your aggression. 3 of the 12 systems you have colonized were under Council protection. Your presence there violates treaties that predate your species' ability to leave your own atmosphere by 6,000 years. Ambassador Vance said we were not aware of those claims when we arrived. Our explorers found empty worlds, worlds with no sentient inhabitants, worlds that appeared to belong to no one. They believed they had the right to settle, to build homes for the millions of humans who were looking for a new start among the stars. Commander Vex slammed his hand on his console, a gesture that silenced the entire hall. He said empty does not mean unclaimed. The galaxy is not a buffet for humanity to pick from. Every world in this sector belongs to someone, whether by settlement right or by protectorate agreement. Your ignorance of our laws does not excuse your violation of them. We do not care what your children dreamed about on Earth. We care about the fact that your species is destabilizing an entire quadrant of the galaxy. The Council took a vote. The process was formal and solemn. Each representative cast their vote in silence, the results appearing on the central display. 17 species, 17 votes. 15 in favor of a quarantine resolution. 1 abstention. 1 opposed. Counselor Zoran turned to face Ambassador Vance directly. He said you are ordered to convey to your government that all human expansion must cease immediately. Your current colonies will be permitted to remain under strict supervision by Council observers. No new colonies will be established anywhere in the galaxy. No military vessels will enter Council-protected space under any circumstances. You have 30 of your days to comply with these terms. After that, the Council will take whatever measures are necessary to enforce the quarantine. Vance looked around the hall slowly. She met the eyes of as many representatives as she could. She saw hard faces and hardened resolves. She saw fear and anger and determination. She also saw a few faces that showed something else, something that might have been doubt or concern. She said, I will convey your message to Earth faithfully and completely. But I must warn the Council. Humanity does not respond well to ultimatums. We are a proud species. We have fought for our freedom many times throughout our history. You may find that confining us only makes us push harder against the walls you build around us. The audience was dismissed without further ceremony. Ambassador Vance returned to the human embassy on Cyrannon Prime and transmitted the full Council decree to Earth. Then she sat in her office and waited for a response, staring out at the alien skyline of a world that might soon become enemy territory. She knew that what came next would change everything for humanity and for the galaxy. On Earth, the news of the quarantine decree was met with shock and anger that rippled across the entire planet. The United Earth government held emergency sessions that lasted for days. Debates raged on every news channel. Public opinion was divided between those who wanted to negotiate and those who wanted to fight. But one sentiment united almost everyone. Humanity would not accept imprisonment. The Secretary of Defense convened a meeting of the Joint Chiefs. Admirals and generals from every branch of Earth's military gathered in the command center beneath the Rocky Mountains. Among them was Admiral Marcus Webb, the commander of Earth's space fleet. Webb was 55 years old, with close-cropped gray hair and a face marked by the severity of decades in Space Command. He had risen through the ranks commanding Earth Defense Forces, and he knew the human fleet better than anyone alive. He had studied Council military tactics for years, anticipating a conflict he hoped would never come. The Secretary of Defense addressed the room. He said the Council expects us to roll over like obedient children. They think we will accept their quarantine because we have no other choice. We need to know what our military options actually are. Can we fight them? Can we win? One by one, the commanders gave their assessments. They were grim. The Council had combined fleet assets that outnumbered humanity by a factor of 50 to 1. Their technology was centuries ahead. Their ships were larger, faster, better armed. A direct military confrontation would be disastrous. Then Admiral Webb stood up. He walked to the holographic display and called up the star charts of known space. He said, everything my colleagues have said is true. The Council fleet is larger. Their technology is more advanced. Their ships are more powerful. But there is one thing we have that they do not. The room fell silent. The secretary asked what that is. Webb replied that we have something to prove. The council has been at peace for millennia. They have not faced a real war in living memory. Their tactics are based on theory and simulation, not on actual combat experience. We have spent our entire existence struggling against adversity. We have fought wars. We have overcome disasters. We have rebuilt from the ashes of our own destruction. We do not know how to quit. That is our advantage. It is the only advantage we have, but it is a powerful one. The secretary nodded slowly. He said, make sure the fleet is ready for anything. We do not know what the council will do, but we need to be prepared for the worst. The 30-day deadline came and went. The United Earth government sent a carefully worded response to the council, requesting an extension for further negotiation. The council denied the request. Meanwhile, a new colony ship departed from Earth for a 13th system, a world on the far side of human-explored space. It was a deliberate act of defiance, a message to the council that Earth would not be dictated to by anyone. The council kept its word. They responded with overwhelming force. The attack on Earth began without warning. A combined council fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system at 0347 hours Earth Standard Time. 40 ships of Cyrannon and Vorth design, each one bristling with weapons that humanity had never seen before. They did not send a message. They did not issue a final demand. They simply opened fire on the outer defense stations. The battle for Earth was brutal and bloody from the first moment. The human defense fleet numbered only 12 capital ships, most of them designed for exploration and patrol rather than sustained combat. They were outnumbered more than 3 to 1. But they fought with a ferocity that surprised the council commanders. Admiral Webb commanded from the bridge of the UNSS Constitution, a battleship that had been rushed into service just months before the attack. The Constitution was humanity's most advanced warship, carrying weapon systems that had never been tested in combat. Now they were being tested against the most powerful fleet humanity had ever faced. Webb watched on the tactical display as the first salvo of council weapons tore through the human picket line. 3 destroyers were vaporized in the opening seconds. Their crews never had a chance to evacuate. The debris field spread outward, mingling with the wreckage of the defense stations that had already been destroyed. Webb ordered all ships to form a defensive line between the enemy and Earth. His voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a commander who knew his crew needed steadiness more than anything else. He said, we cannot let them reach the planet. If they get close enough to begin orbital bombardment, we lose everything. Hold the line no matter what it costs. No ship retreats. No ship surrenders. We are all that stands between the Council and our homeworld. The human fleet formed a wall of steel and fire between the enemy and the blue-green planet behind them. They traded ship for ship, salvo for salvo. The Council had better technology, better weapons, better shields. But the humans had desperation on their side. They knew what they were fighting for. They could see Earth in their viewports, beautiful and vibrant and alive. They would not let it die. The bridge of the Constitution shook as a Council energy bolt slammed into the forward shields. Warning alarms blared. Damage control teams rushed to contain the damage. Webb gripped his command chair and watched the tactical display, calculating odds, looking for any advantage. He saw one. The Council ships were fighting in standard formation, a textbook deployment that had been used by Cyrannon fleets for thousands of years. It was efficient. It was predictable. And Webb realized he could exploit it. He ordered the 3 fastest human ships to break formation and accelerate toward the Council flank. The Council commander, seeing the apparent disorder, adjusted his formation to counter the move. That was exactly what Webb wanted. The shift created a gap in the Council defensive screen. Webb ordered the Constitution and 2 other battleships to push through the gap at maximum speed. The human ships surged forward, weapons blazing. They caught the Council flagship in a crossfire. Its shields flickered and failed. Then a barrage of missiles found their mark. The Council flagship exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the entire battlefield. The loss of their command ship threw the Council fleet into momentary confusion. Communications broke down. Ships began acting independently rather than as a coordinated force. Webb pressed the advantage. He said they are disorganized. Hit them now before they regroup. Every ship, maximum firepower. Do not let them recover. The human fleet poured fire into the disorganized Council formation. Another ship exploded. Then another. The Council commander, now operating from a secondary vessel, made the decision to withdraw and regroup. The Council fleet began to pull back, covering their retreat with heavy fire from their rear ships. Webb considered pursuing, but his ships were too damaged, too low on ammunition. He let them go. The battle had lasted 6 hours. By the end, the human fleet had been reduced to 4 ships. The Constitution was heavily damaged, its port side a smoldering ruin. Over half the crew had been killed or wounded. But the Council fleet had also taken losses. 9 of their ships were destroyed. 11 more were damaged enough to require significant repairs. The remaining 20 had expended most of their munitions and were in no condition to continue the attack. Commander Vex, who had been leading the Council assault from the secondary command ship, made the tactical decision to withdraw to Council space. The human defenses were much stronger than intelligence had suggested. He would regroup, rearm, and return with a larger force. The war would not be won in a single battle. The Council fleet jumped back into hyperspace. Earth was battered but unbroken. The attack had failed in its primary objective of forcing a human surrender. But the cost was staggering. Over 8,000 human spacers had died defending their homeworld. 3 colonies in the outer system had been glassed by Council orbital bombardment before the human fleet could intervene. Millions of civilians were dead. The damage to Earth's orbital infrastructure would take years to repair. The message was unmistakable. The Council would not stop until humanity was contained or destroyed. In the aftermath of the battle, Admiral Webb was promoted to Fleet Admiral, the highest rank in human space forces. He was given command of every ship, every station, every soldier humanity possessed. The weight of an entire species' survival rested on his shoulders. He stood before the remnants of the fleet 2 days after the battle, gathered in the ruins of the orbital shipyard that had been partially destroyed in the attack. The crew stood at attention among the twisted metal and flickering lights. Many of them were wounded. All of them were exhausted. But they stood tall. Webb addressed them without notes, speaking from the heart. He said the Council thought that attacking Earth would break us. They thought that showing us their power would make us submit. They thought that killing our people would make us afraid. They were wrong. We are still here. We are still fighting. Our homeworld still orbits our sun. And now we are going to show them what happens when you push humanity too far. The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed through the damaged shipyard. But Webb knew the hard truth. The fleet was in shambles. They had 4 battle-worthy ships remaining, a handful of smaller support vessels, and a shipyard that would take months to repair. They needed time that they might not have. They needed resources that were scarce. They needed a plan that could turn the tide of a war that was just beginning. Ambassador Eleanor Vance arrived on Mars 2 weeks after the battle. She had been evacuated from Cyrannon Prime when the war began, barely escaping before Council security forces could detain her. She walked into Webb's command center with fire in her eyes and purpose in her step. She said, "I tried diplomacy. I spent 15 years building relationships on the Council, and it was not enough. The Council will not listen to reason. They see us as a disease that needs to be cured, a fire that needs to be extinguished. But I know their weaknesses. I know their internal politics. I know where they are divided and where they are vulnerable. Webb asked her what she proposed. Vance said that the council is not a monolith. The Cyrannon are the founders and the most powerful, but the other species have their own interests and agendas. The Vorth respect strength above all else, and they have already seen that we can fight. The Xylos value logic and evidence, and they are beginning to question whether the war makes strategic sense. The Galvani care only about trade and profit, and the war is hurting their bottom line. If we can exploit these divisions, we can turn some of them away from the conflict. We can weaken the coalition from within. Webb said that is a long-term strategy, and it is a good one. But we need a short-term victory first. The Council will be back with more ships. We need to hit them hard before they are ready to hit us again. We need to show them that attacking Earth was just the beginning, not the end. Vance nodded. She said then we need both strategies. You fight the war. I fight the peace. Between the two of us, we might just save humanity from extinction. The human fleet spent the next 3 months rebuilding with desperate urgency. Every shipyard in the solar system worked around the clock, crews rotating in 12-hour shifts. New ships were constructed from the keel up. Existing ones were repaired and upgraded with lessons learned from the battle. Webb personally oversaw every aspect of the fleet expansion, pushing his engineers to find new ways to counter Council technology. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A civilian research team on Luna had been studying fragments of Vorth weaponry recovered from the battle. They discovered a critical vulnerability. Council ships used a specific frequency range for their shield harmonics, a frequency that could be disrupted with concentrated electromagnetic pulses delivered at precisely the right wavelength. Webb ordered every ship in the fleet to be fitted with EMP cannons. They were crude weapons, little more than modified civilian power converters aimed through focusing arrays. They did not look impressive. But they did not need to be elegant. They just needed to work. While Webb rebuilt the fleet, Ambassador Vance worked tirelessly behind the scenes. She maintained secret communication channels with sympathetic elements within the Council. She reminded the Galvani of the lucrative trade agreements that humanity had offered before the war, agreements that could be restored and expanded. She pointed out to the Xylos that the human drive for exploration had led to numerous scientific discoveries that had been shared freely with the galaxy. She told the Vorth that a prolonged war against a determined opponent would bleed the Council drive for generations, weakening them against other threats. Her arguments found traction in unexpected quarters. The Galvani began to quietly question the economic cost of the war. The Xylos argued for more study of human psychology before committing to total conflict. Even among the Vorth, some voices wondered whether humanity might be better as allies than as enemies. The cracks in the Council unity began to show. But the war party was still firmly in control. Commander Vex had returned to Cyrannon Prime demanding massive reinforcements. He argued forcefully that the attack on Earth had failed only because he had been given too few ships. He promised that with a larger force, he could crush human resistance in a single decisive engagement. The Council authorized a second fleet. This time, 60 ships would be assembled from across Council space. Their target was not Earth. The Council had learned from the first attempt. This time, they would strike at Liberty Prime, humanity's largest and most prosperous colony in the Tau Ceti system. Liberty Prime was a world of 7 million people, settled 40 years earlier by colonists seeking a new life far from Earth. It had grown into a thriving center of agriculture and industry, producing food and manufactured goods that were shipped across human space. It was the jewel of humanity's colonial empire. And now it was in the crosshairs of the Council fleet. Webb received intelligence of the coming attack through a network of spies and informants that Ambassador Vance had cultivated. He had 3 weeks to prepare. He made a decision that surprised his commanders. He would not defend Liberty Prime from orbit. He would take the fight to the enemy before they ever reached the colony. He would ambush the Council fleet in the outer reaches of the Tau Ceti system. He committed every available ship to the operation. 28 vessels, including the newly repaired Constitution. It was a massive gamble. If he lost, humanity would have no fleet left to defend Earth or any of its colonies. But if he won, it would prove that the Council could be beaten on their own terms. The human fleet hid behind the gas giant Tau Ceti 7, a massive world with a powerful magnetic field that masked their approach from enemy sensors. They waited in silence for 3 days, their reactors running at minimal power, their crews living in near darkness to avoid detection. On the third day, the Council fleet arrived exactly on schedule. 60 ships dropping out of hyperspace in perfect military formation. They began their slow advance toward Liberty Prime, unaware of the trap that awaited them among the moons of the gas giant. Webb waited until the Council fleet had passed the gas giant's orbit. Then he gave the order. He said, "All ships, advance at full speed. Target their shield generators with EMP cannons as soon as you are in range. Once their shields are down, hit them with everything we have. No hesitation. No mercy." The human fleet emerged from behind the gas giant and accelerated toward the Council formation with maximum thrust. The Council ships scrambled to respond, but they were caught completely off guard. The humans had the advantage of surprise, and they used it ruthlessly. The EMP cannons fired first. Concentrated pulses of electromagnetic energy crossed the void and slammed into the Council ships. Shields flickered, distorted, and failed across a dozen vessels. For a brief window of opportunity, the most powerful ships in the Council fleet were completely vulnerable. The human gunners did not waste a single second. Missiles streaked from launch tubes. Railgun rounds accelerated to relativistic speeds. Directed energy weapons burned through unprotected hull plating. The first volley was devastating. 6 Council ships were destroyed in the opening 30 seconds of the engagement. Their reactors breached, their magazines detonated, their crews lost in flashes of light that were visible across the system. 4 more ships were critically damaged, drifting without power, their crews fighting to contain fires and breaches. Commander Vex, commanding the Council fleet from his flagship, roared orders to his subordinates. He said, "Form a defensive perimeter immediately. Protect the capital ships. Return fire. Do not let them break our formation." The Council fleet responded with the discipline of a military force that had been training for war for centuries. They tightened their formation and began to lay down suppressing fire. Energy bolts and kinetic projectiles filled the space between the two fleets. The human ships were forced to break off their attack run to avoid being destroyed. But the damage was done. The Council had lost 10 ships in the first minute of battle, and more were damaged. More importantly, their confidence had been shattered. They had arrived expecting an easy victory against what they considered a primitive species. Instead, they found themselves fighting a desperate, innovative enemy that refused to follow the established rules of war. The battle settled into a brutal exchange of fire that lasted for 4 hours. The two fleets maneuvered through the outer system, trading salvos and taking losses. The human ships were smaller and less powerful, but they were faster and more maneuverable. They used their speed to dictate the range of engagement, staying just outside the effective range of Council weapons while delivering their own fire. By the end of the 4 hours, neither side could claim a clear victory. The Council had lost 15 ships total, with 12 more damaged. The humans had lost 8 ships, with 10 more damaged. But the Council fleet had been stopped cold. They could not advance on Liberty Prime without risking unacceptable losses. Commander Vex, furious but pragmatic, ordered a tactical withdrawal to regroup. The human fleet did not pursue. They had achieved their objective. Liberty Prime was safe. The Council had been bloodied. The legend of Admiral Webb and the Battle of Tau Ceti spread through every human settlement in the galaxy. The war was far from over, but humanity had proven that they could meet the Council in battle and hold their own. But Admiral Webb was not celebrating. He stood on the bridge of the Constitution, looking at the damage reports coming in from across his fleet. He knew the war was far from over, and the next phase would be even harder. He said to his command staff that the Council just learned the same lesson we learned at Earth. We are harder to kill than they expected. But they have 50 times our industrial capacity. They can rebuild their fleet faster than we can rebuild ours. Next time, they will bring more ships and better tactics. We need to change the game before that happens. Webb was right. The Council was furious about the defeat at Tau Ceti. It was an embarrassment that echoed through the halls of Cyrannon Prime. Commander Vex was relieved of command and replaced with a Cyrannon Admiral named Voreth. Voreth was older than Vex, more experienced, and far more methodical and ruthless. Admiral Voreth studied the human tactics with painstaking care. He analyzed every sensor recording from both battles. He studied human military history, their strategies, their cultural attitudes toward war. He began to understand how the humans thought. And he began to develop countermeasures tailored to their weaknesses. His plan was simple but devastating. He would not attack human colonies directly. That played to human strengths, giving them defensive positions and morale advantages. Instead, he would cut their supply lines. He would destroy their shipyards and fuel depots. He would strangle them slowly, systematically, until they had no choice but to surrender or starve. The campaign began with precision raids on human mining operations in the asteroid belt. Council ships would appear without warning, destroy the mining stations, and disappear before the human fleet could respond. Then they hit the orbital shipyards at Mars. 3 shipyards were destroyed in a single hour, setting back human construction capabilities by months. Then they attacked the fuel processing facilities in the Jupiter system. Humanity's war machine began to slow. Ships could not be repaired without functioning shipyards. They could not fight without fuel. The Council blockade was tightening around Earth and its remaining colonies like a noose. Webb knew he had to change the strategy fundamentally. He could not afford to fight a defensive war indefinitely. The Council had too many resources, too many ships, too many systems to draw from. Every day of defensive fighting drained human reserves that could not be replaced. He had to take the war to the enemy. He had to make them feel the same fear, the same pain, the same desperation that they were inflicting on humanity. He presented his plan to the Joint Chiefs in a secure briefing room on Mars. The holographic display showed the entire galaxy, with Council territory marked in blue and human territory marked in red. The disparity was staggering. Council space encompassed thousands of systems. Human space was barely a dozen dots. Webb said, "We are going to take the fight to the Council. We are going to push through their territory, system by system, until we reach their core worlds. We are going to show them that humanity cannot be contained by any wall they build." The Joint Chiefs were skeptical. The Chief of Staff said the Council has thousands of ships spread across their territory. We have fewer than 50 operational vessels. Pushing into their space would be suicide. We would be cut off, surrounded, and destroyed. Webb replied that it is suicide only if we fight the way they expect us to fight. We are not going to engage their main fleet head-on. We are going to hit their supply lines. We are going to destroy their shipyards. We are going to liberate their subject worlds and turn their own allies against them. We are going to be everywhere at once, a ghost that they cannot catch. The plan was audacious, risky, and brilliant in its simplicity. It was also humanity's only realistic option. The human fleet departed from Earth 3 weeks later. 42 ships, including every vessel that could be made ready for combat. They left behind a skeleton force of 12 small ships to defend the Sol system. The departure was emotional. Families gathered at spaceports to say goodbye. Many of them knew they might never see their loved ones again. Before the fleet jumped into hyperspace, Admiral Webb addressed every crew member through the shipboard intercoms. His voice was steady, calm, and confident. He said, "We are going where no human has gone before. We are going to the heart of the Council itself. We are going to show them that humanity does not surrender. We are going to show them that we are not a disease to be contained. We are a force to be reckoned with. And when this war is over, they will remember the day they decided to make an enemy of Earth. The fleet jumped into hyperspace together. The counteroffensive had begun. The first target was the Council supply depot at Proxima Centauri, a refueling station that serviced Council patrol ships operating near human space. It was defended by a single corvette and a few defense platforms. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace and destroyed it in 20 minutes. The Council garrison was overwhelmed before they could call for reinforcements. The next target was the repair shipyard at Barnard Star. This was a larger facility capable of servicing capital ships. 3 Council cruisers were in dock for maintenance. The human fleet hit the shipyard with surgical precision. The shipyard was obliterated. The cruisers were destroyed at their berths. The raids continued for weeks, following a pattern designed to maximize confusion. The humans would strike one system, then jump to a completely different sector, then strike again. They never stayed in one place long enough for the Council to trap them. They were ghosts, appearing from nowhere and disappearing just as quickly. But there was a growing problem. Every raid consumed fuel and ammunition that could not be easily replaced. The human fleet was burning through its reserves at an alarming rate. They were far from home with no supply lines of their own. They needed a friendly port, a place to resupply and repair, or the campaign would grind to a halt. Ambassador Vance provided the solution. She had maintained her secret contacts within the Council, and one of them had borne unexpected fruit. The Galvani, the traitor species that had always been ambivalent about the war, were growing increasingly unhappy with the conflict. It was disrupting their trade routes. It was destroying markets they had spent centuries building. Their leaders wanted the war to end. Vance arranged a secret meeting between Webb and Galvani representatives on a neutral world in the outer reaches of Council space. The meeting was tense. The Galvani were taking a huge risk by meeting with the enemy. But Vance had prepared the ground carefully. She made the case that humanity would eventually win the war, and that the Galvani needed to position themselves on the winning side. She offered a deal. The Galvani would provide fuel and supplies to the human fleet in secret. In exchange, they would receive preferential trade rights with humanity after the war, including exclusive access to human markets for certain goods. The Galvani representative, a shrewd trader named Corvin, studied the terms carefully. He said that this deal carries enormous risk. If the Cyranni discover our involvement, our entire species could face sanctions or worse. We need guarantees that humanity can actually win this war. Webb spoke up. He said we have already won 2 battles against superior forces. We are deep in Council territory and we are still fighting. We have not lost a single engagement. The Council is afraid of us. They do not know how to defeat us. If you bet on us, you will win. Corvin considered for a long moment. Then he extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement. He said we will provide the supplies you need. In return, humanity will remember its friends when the war is over. The deal was struck. The Galvani began secretly supplying the human fleet with fuel, ammunition, and replacement parts. The supply lines that the Council had tried to cut were restored through the most unlikely of allies. With their logistics secured, the human fleet continued their advance. They pushed deeper into Council territory, system by system. They did not just destroy military targets. They also offered liberation to worlds that had been under Council control for centuries. On every world they entered, Admiral Webb gave the same orders. He said we are not here to destroy. We are here to free. We are not the monsters the Council claims we are. We will prove it by our actions. No human will harm civilians. No human will loot or pillage. We will treat every being we encounter with respect and dignity. The orders were followed without exception. Human soldiers distributed food and medicine to local populations. They repaired damaged infrastructure. They protected civilians from reprisals. Word of their conduct spread through the sector. The Council propaganda machine tried to paint them as barbarians, but the evidence on the ground told a different story. The liberated worlds began to rise up against their Council governors. They had seen that the Council was not invincible, that their power could be challenged. Armed resistance movements sprang up on a dozen worlds. The Council found itself fighting a war on multiple fronts, its resources stretched thinner by the day. The Council leadership was in chaos. Admiral Voritha's strategy of strangling human supply lines had failed because the Galvani had secretly restored them. The human fleet was rampaging through Council territory with impunity. Subject worlds were rebelling. The war that was supposed to be a quick and decisive quarantine had turned into a galaxy-wide conflict with no end in sight. Commander Vex, who had been restored to a command position after Voritha's failures, proposed a desperate gambit. He would gather every available Council ship, every vessel that could be spared from other duties, and launch a direct assault on Earth. Not a raid this time. A full-scale invasion with overwhelming force. If he could destroy humanity's homeworld, the war would end. The human fleet would have no reason to continue fighting. They would surrender or scatter. The Council debated for 3 days. Some argued that the plan was too risky, that it would leave Council space undefended. Others argued that it was the only option left. In the end, the war party won. 300 ships were assembled from across Council space. It was the largest fleet ever gathered in the history of the galaxy. They set course for Earth, their path cleared by overwhelming numbers. Webb received word of the approaching armada through Ambassador Vance's intelligence network. He gathered his command staff to discuss the situation. The tactical officer said if 300 ships reach Earth, the planet will fall. There is no question. We do not have enough defenses to stop that many ships. Webb studied the holographic display. He was silent for a long time, calculating, thinking. Then he made the hardest decision of his military career. He said, "We are not going back to Earth." The command staff was stunned. The Chief of Staff said if we do not return, Earth will be destroyed. Billions of people will die. We cannot abandon our homeworld. Webb replied, that is exactly what the Council expects us to do. They expect us to turn around and race back to Earth. They will be ready for us. They will set a trap and destroy us. And then Earth will fall anyway. He pointed at the display, at the Cyrannon system, the capital of the Council. He said, we are going to do something they do not expect. We are going to push forward. We are going to strike at the heart of the Council itself. If we can threaten their capital, if we can make them fear for their own survival, they will be forced to recall their fleet. The room was silent. The plan was insane. But as the officers studied the tactical situation, they began to see the logic. It was the only move that could save Earth. Commander Torres, the captain of the UNSS Dauntless, spoke up. She was a veteran of both the Battle of Earth and the Tau Ceti engagement. She had lost her entire bridge crew at Earth and had rebuilt her command from scratch. She said, my crew has been through hell. Half of them are raw replacements who never expected to see combat. But they will follow me wherever I go. And I will follow you. One by one, the other commanders voiced their agreement. They knew the odds. They knew they might never see Earth again. But they also knew that Admiral Webb was right. This was the only play that could save their homeworld. Second Lieutenant Chen was 23 years old, the youngest officer on the Constitution. He served on the port damage control team. He had enlisted because he wanted to see the galaxy, not because he wanted to fight a war. But war had found him anyway. When the order came to jump to Cyrannon Prime, he felt his stomach drop. He knew what they were heading into. The Council capital would be the most heavily defended target in the galaxy. The chances of survival were low. But as he looked around at his crewmates, the men and women who had bled and fought alongside him for months, he found a strange sense of peace. If this was where his journey ended, there was no better place to make a stand. The fleet jumped together, 40 ships streaking through hyperspace toward their destiny. The journey took 6 hours. On every ship, crews made their final preparations. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Damage control teams reviewed their procedures. Letters were written to loved ones on Earth, sealed and stored in the ship data banks, to be delivered only if the writer did not return. Admiral Webb sent a message to Earth before they made their final jump. It was brief and direct. He said, "Hold on. We are going to end this war. Trust us. We will not let you down." The human fleet made its final jump. 40 ships, battered and worn from months of continuous combat, emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Cyrannon system. Before them lay the capital world of the Galactic Council. It was defended by what remained of the Council's home fleet, over 100 ships that had not been sent with the Armada to Earth. The battle for Cyrannon Prime was the largest and most decisive engagement of the entire war. The human fleet faced over 100 defending ships. The odds were worse than 2 to 1, worse than 3 to 1. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and far from home. But they had something the defenders did not. They had momentum from a string of victories. They had desperation born of knowing that their homeworld was in mortal danger. And they had Admiral Marcus Webb, who had become the most brilliant military commander in human history. Webb divided his fleet into 3 attack groups. The first group, under Commander Torres, would engage the defenders directly to draw their attention and fire. The second group, under Commander Park, would sweep around the flank to target the planetary defense platforms. The third group, led by Webb himself on the Constitution, would make a direct run at the capital city on the surface. The battle began with a coordinated barrage of EMP cannon fire. The human ships fired as one, a concentrated volley that overwhelmed the forward shields of the Council defenders. Shields flickered and failed across a broad section of the enemy formation. Then the missiles came. Hundreds of them, streaking toward the enemy formation at impossible speeds. Point defense systems fired, but there were too many missiles. They got through. The first wave of explosions tore through the Council formation. 5 ships were destroyed instantly. A dozen more were damaged. The Council defenders, trained in centuries of military tradition, responded with textbook precision. They tightened their formation and returned fire. The battle became a brutal slugging match. The first attack group traded fire with the Council defenders, ship for ship, salvo for salvo. The human ships were smaller, but their crews were more aggressive. They pushed closer than any sensible commander would have recommended, trading accuracy for range. The human losses were catastrophic. Commander Torres reported that her group had lost half its ships in the first 20 minutes. But they had also destroyed 15 Council vessels. The ratio was almost even, which was better than anyone had hoped. Commander Park's group had more success. They swept around the flank at high speed, catching the planetary defense platforms in a crossfire. The platforms were designed to engage targets approaching from the inner system, not from behind. They were vulnerable. Park's ships destroyed 6 platforms before the defenders could adjust their tactics. But the cost was high. Park lost 10 more ships in the process. The human fleet was being whittled down, and the main Council formation was still largely intact. That left the Constitution and 6 remaining ships to make the final push. They accelerated towards Cyrannon Prime at maximum thrust, running a gauntlet of enemy fire. The Council threw everything at them. Ships exploded on both sides. The Constitution took hit after hit, its shields failing, its hull breached in 3 places. On the bridge, alarms screamed. Damage control reports flooded in. The chief engineer reported that the port reactor was running at 60% and losing power. The helmsman reported that maneuverability was reduced by half. The weapons officer reported that only 2 missile tubes were still operational. Webb stood at the center of the chaos, calm and focused. He asked how long until we reach orbit. The helmsman said 8 minutes at current speed. Webb said make it 5. The helmsman looked at the damage readouts. He said, "Sir, if I push the engines any harder, they might fail entirely." Webb said, "Then we will coast the rest of the way. Push them." The Constitution accelerated, its damaged engines screaming in protest. The ship vibrated violently. Loose panels fell from the ceiling. Crew members held on to their stations to avoid being thrown to the floor. The Council defenders concentrated their fire on the lead human ship. Energy bolts and kinetic projectiles slammed into the Constitution's battered hull. A near miss tore away an entire sensor array. Another hit opened a new breach in the forward section. But the Constitution kept going. It pushed through the storm of fire, shedding debris like a wounded animal fleeing a predator. The crew fought to keep their ship together, patching breaches, rerouting power, refusing to die. But they made it. The Constitution entered orbit of Cyrannon Prime, its weapons systems targeting the Capitol building where the Galactic Council met. The Admiral's voice was broadcast on every frequency as he opened a channel to the surface. He said, "This is Fleet Admiral Marcus Webb of the United Earth Space Fleet, commanding the UNSS Constitution. I am in orbit of your capital world. I have enough firepower remaining to turn your city into a crater. I do not want to do that. I am not here to destroy or to kill. I am here to end this war. I am giving you one chance to negotiate before I am left with no other choice." On the surface, panic spread through the council chamber. Councillor Zoran demanded to know where their armada was, the 300 ships that had been sent to destroy Earth. The answer came moments later. The armada was still en route. They had been delayed by a rebel uprising in the Galvani sector. They could not return in time to save Cyrannon Prime. Councillor Zoran looked at the holographic display showing the human ships in orbit. He had underestimated humanity. He had believed that the quarantine would be accepted, that the humans would fall in line. He had been wrong. The cost of his miscalculation was now visible in the burning wreckage of his homeworld's orbital defenses. He said to the assembled council that they have beaten us. Our homeworld is at their mercy. We have no choice but to negotiate. The war is over. Ambassador Eleanor Vance was brought to the council chamber under a flag of truce. She walked through the same doors she had entered months ago, when the quarantine decree was issued. But this time, the power dynamic was different. This time, she held the advantage. Councillor Zoran spoke first. He said, "Your Admiral has made his point clearly. His ships are in our orbit. His weapons are aimed at our capital. What does humanity want?" Ambassador Vance replied that we want what we have always wanted. The freedom to explore. The freedom to build. The freedom to find our place among the stars. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We do not want to destroy your civilization. We have had multiple opportunities to bomb civilian targets during this war, and we have refused every time. We want to be left alone to pursue our destiny, and we want our rightful place as members of the galactic community. The terms were negotiated over the next 3 days. It was a complex process involving lawyers, diplomats, and military advisors from both sides. The final agreement had several key points. First, the quarantine was lifted immediately. Human ships could travel anywhere in the galaxy without restriction. Second, humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Council with all rights and responsibilities. Third, the 3 disputed colonies were recognized as legitimate human territory. Fourth, humanity agreed to respect future council protectorates and to submit disputes to binding arbitration. Fifth, the Galvani were granted the trade rights that had been promised to them. The war was over. Humanity had won. On Earth, the news of the victory sparked celebrations that lasted for weeks. People poured into the streets of every city. Fireworks lit the skies. Strangers embraced. In London, a crowd gathered in Trafalgar Square and sang the national anthem. In Tokyo, millions lined the streets waving flags and banners. In New York, the entire city came to a standstill as people watched the news broadcasts on giant screens in Times Square. Humanity had faced the most powerful political entity in the galaxy and had not only survived but had prevailed. When the first ships of the human fleet entered the Sol system, the welcome was overwhelming. Every available vessel, from military shuttles to civilian pleasure craft, flew out to greet them. The space around Earth was filled with lights as ships formed a parade escort. The crews of the returning vessels stood at attention on their flight decks, tears streaming down their faces, as they saw their homeworld growing larger in their viewports. The Constitution was the last ship to arrive. It had been too damaged to make the jump with the rest of the fleet. It had limped home on emergency power, its crew working around the clock to keep the reactor stable. When it finally emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, every ship in the system broadcast a message of welcome. Admiral Webb stood on the damaged bridge of the Constitution, looking at the blue and green world that he had fought so hard to defend. He allowed himself a moment of emotion, a single tear that he quickly wiped away. Then he turned to his crew and said, "We are home." The human fleet returned home as heroes. Admiral Webb was given a parade through the streets of every major city on Earth. Medals were awarded. Speeches were made. The names of the fallen were carved into monuments that would stand for centuries. Ambassador Vance was hailed as the voice that saved humanity. She was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor. She took her seat on the Galactic Council as humanity's first representative, a position she held for the rest of her life. But the cost of victory was remembered. Over 30,000 human spacers had died in the war. Millions of civilians had perished in the attack on Earth and the subsequent campaigns. The orbital infrastructure of the Sol system would take a decade to fully rebuild. The scars of the war would take generations to heal. Admiral Webb stood before the assembled fleet one last time at a ceremony in orbit around Earth. He looked at the ships that had survived, at the crews who had fought alongside him, at the planet below that they had defended. He said, "We did not ask for this war. But we finished it. We proved that humanity cannot be contained. We proved that we are worthy of our place among the stars. But we also proved something more important. We proved that we can be merciful in victory. In all our battles, we never bombed civilian populations. We never destroyed a world we could have liberated. We showed the galaxy that we are better than they thought we were. That is the true measure of our victory." After the ceremony, Admiral Webb visited the memorial wall at the naval base on Luna. The wall bore the names of every human spacer who had died in the war. 30,000 names, etched into black stone. He ran his fingers over the names of crew members he had known personally. He stopped at the name of Commander Torres, who had died in the final assault on Cyrannon Prime where a ship, the Dauntless, had taken a direct hit to its reactor. He stopped at the name of Second Lieutenant Chen, who had died sealing a hull breach on the Constitution, saving the ship but sacrificing himself in the process. To be 93 years old and spent his final years advocating for peaceful exploration and international cooperation. He never stopped believing that humanity's greatest strength was not its weapons but its spirit. The war that was supposed to contain humanity had the opposite effect. Freed from the quarantine, human explorers pushed further and faster than ever before. New colonies were established on 100 worlds. Trade routes connected human space with the rest of the galaxy. Human art, music, and literature spread to species that had never encountered anything like them. But the humans carried with them the lessons they had learned. They had faced extinction and had refused to bow. They had fought a war they did not want and had won without losing their humanity. They had proven that they were explorers, not conquerors. Builders, not destroyers. They were humanity, and they had earned their place in the galaxy. Please like and subscribe to our channel.